Imagine being a good Baptist girl growing up in the church and realizing that you're different, and then realizing that being different means that you're gay, and yet you're a Christian. We'll be talking with Cheryl Allison, an actress and still a Baptist, about her experience coming up on Good God. Stay with us. Welcome to Good God, conversations that matter about faith and public life. I'm the host, George Mason, and I'm delighted to welcome to the program today Cheryl Allison, who is my dear friend and church mate, I should say, as a matter of fact. And that itself is one of the beautiful things I want us to talk about. But I think which should start out at least by saying that Cheryl is an actress and a director and a producer, and she's lived all over the country, New York and LA, and back in Dallas now, which is a real treat for us, Cheryl, that you're back home in a way. And want to talk all about that, but maybe we should start, in fact, with what brought you back to Dallas and what brought you back to Wilshire Baptist Church, because you grew up in Wilshire Baptist Church.
I did. I joined Wilshire in 1977.
Yes.
At the age of 11. So now we know how old I am.
And that would be 12 years before I got there as pastor.
Yes. So. Our pastor was Bruce McKeever.
Right.
So my family joined then, and I was a member until 1990. When I moved, after I graduated with my master's, moved to New York.
And your mom and dad stayed in the church, Brian and Cynthia, and were our dear friends until they retired and moved to Denton and all of that. But then you came back to Dallas with your wife, Natalie.
I did.
And that was a product of both a desire, I guess, to be back in Dallas, but also the possibility of you coming back and being whole because of the marriage equality decision.
Exactly. Yeah. I had moved to New York and lived there for over 10 years, and met Natalie in New York. Right. And we had a commitment ceremony there at Rutgers Presbyterian Church. Right. Of course, there was no legal rights to that. It was really in the eyes of God for me. And then after many years there, we moved to Los Angeles because of a job promotion for Natalie. After being there about 10 years, Natalie was starting to look to retire, and we were thinking about it, and we didn't want to stay in LA for retirement and had no desire to go back to New York. And very close to my family, of course. Her family's in Florida, and we thought, Dallas is a great central location. I can still get to New York for a lot of my work. So emotionally, it was an incredible decision because I have incredible relatives in Houston and my family is here, like you mentioned. So that was all good. As far as being a gay couple and coming back to Texas, it was very difficult. Sure. Because we had domestic partner rights. Marriage equality was just starting in the different states. Yes. And so, although we had state rights through California as domestic partners, Texas didn't offer anything. So, it's very difficult to think about moving back to a state, which is my home state, and it doesn't feel like home.
Well, and when you land in Texas, you move from being recognized in one state as being married with all the rights that accrue to such a public covenant, and then in Texas, you have to carry your papers around all the time just to sort of prove that if something went wrong, that you would be honored in some way.
Every time we were in a state let me back up. We had domestic partner rights in California, but we still had all our paperwork, healthcare proxies, that sort of thing. So when we would come to Dallas, we would have those with us because if we were on I-45 South heading to Houston to visit my grandmother and we had an accident or something, we had to have that paperwork or I would not have been considered her next of kin or even been able to visit her in the hospital. Right. And I think a lot of people don't understand that aspect of it.
Right.
So,
which is why the marriage equality decision by the Supreme Court was so important to you and to so many, because it took away that state decision, state-by-state decision, and gave you the confidence that anywhere you could go, you would be recognized in an equal way.
And we had a hard decision to possibly make, because since marriage equality was going on the state level, it was legal in California, but it became legal after we had already moved to Texas. And then New York passed it. And so because we had had our commitment ceremony in New York, Natalie and I flew back there, and we were legally married in the state of New York by our same pastor who had performed our commitment ceremony. What was really bittersweet about that is our legal marriage was recognized in, at the time, I think it was 13 states. But when we would get on the plane to fly back to Texas, we were unrecognized. So it's a very hard thing to get off the plane at LaGuardia and be married and recognized, and get off the plane at DFW and not be. So when the Supreme Court was taking on the case to decide if they would now say, it has to be federal. All states must recognize gay marriage. We thought, if it does not pass, if it doesn't go in our favor, can we stay living in a state that we don't have rights? And we talked to my parents about it and said, depending on how this goes, on June 26th, we will then decide. We would probably have moved maybe back to California or New York. So I'm so grateful on many levels. Well,
we are too, because you and Natalie have come to our church and been such a delightful presence, great partners in ministry and enthusiastic, and we're so grateful for that in so many ways. But growing up in the Baptist church, tell us what it was like for you to come to a growing awareness of your sexual orientation, and how you wrestled with that in a Baptist church that was maybe not fundamentalist, but didn't necessarily at that time address the issue or support it in such a way as we do today. Talk about what that was like for you.
Well, life-changing. Wilshire was a huge part of my life growing up. Like I said, I was 11. So many of my, dear lifelong friends, I made at Wilshire. I was incredibly involved, from softball to youth choir, starring in the musicals, helped prompt my career.
Well, it's interesting. I think most people may not realize how many people in the entertainment industry grew up in churches that either singing in the choir or were doing church musicals. This became their vocational entry point, right?
Absolutely. It was a huge influence, and in a lot of ways gave me training. Because I had the opportunity to sing on Sundays and sing in the choir, and also to see other incredible artists. I mean, Cynthia Clausen walks on water to me. So I was 5 years old when I met her, because my father's a former Baptist minister of music. So she had come to our church in Victoria, Texas, and made a huge influence. So the church was absolutely my family. I think around junior high, when you start to go through puberty, I started to feel different. I couldn't put a label around it. I couldn't define it, because especially back then, there were no examples. There was no Ellen, people like that, to sort of be a change maker for us. So I knew that I felt a little different. I didn't know why. I knew certain things about the church bothered me. I remember I was very affected when we had first joined Wilshire, and I idolized our youth minister at the time. And he became engaged to a wonderful woman in the church who happened to be divorced. And he was asked to leave the church.
Really? Oh, this is a story I don't know. Okay.
And I even asked my mother about it, because I was like, I am recalling this correctly, right? And I am. And that shows how far the church has come. But I remember being, in grade school going, this isn't right, and I don't understand this. And so when I began to feel different, I had a lot of fear because I had seen that. And I thought, well, I could be asked to leave. And I didn't quite understand yet why, but I knew something felt different. And I was apart but separate.
Yes.
So then in high school, when things started to become clearer, and early college, you know, I was going to school up in Denton, so I wasn't coming, you know, back to Dallas regularly. And I ended up coming out to my parents. And it was a growth process for them.
Sure.
You know, they're incredible people. They had gay friends in their life, and people that had been in my father's youth choir and things like that.
Yes.
But when it's your own child, I think it's much more of a journey for them.
Right.
So a lot of communication, a lot of conversation, and they're incredibly accepting and loving and supportive. But I then started to back away from the church.
Sure.
Because I knew that I thought they love me because they don't know me. You know, that's how I felt. And then I moved to New York, so I didn't have to worry about my relationship with Wilshire then.
Sure. So that was our church. But in a sense, it was the church because it's the only church you really knew or had experienced very much of. And if our church was not a safe place for you, it's probably hard to trust another church as well.
Exactly.
I think many gay people go through this as they're young, and they're trying to figure out not only their relationship to the church, but then also their relationship to God because of that. Did you struggle not only with the church, but with God about your sexuality?
Interestingly enough, I did not.
Okay.
I had this innate sense that God was on my side.
Interesting.
I never went through self-hatred that some members of the LGBTQ community go through, especially I think in the South, and Christian gays they don't want to be gay. And so they go through a little bit of that. I never did. Maybe it was my makeup, maybe, you know, because I was so bent on getting to New York and very strong in that aspect to have a career there. I just knew God was on my side, that He loved me. So I had my own spirituality, my own relationship with Christ on my own.
Yes.
And then ended up about 5 years after being in New York finding Rutgers Presbyterian on the Upper West Side. And they were one of the very first, they call it More Light churches in the Presbyterian church.
Yes, right. I remember that.
And I walked in and it felt, you know, it was a different denomination.
Sure.
So it was a little different there. But I walked in and I was a part of them. And that was the first time I had felt that. And so I started to blend that relationship back again.
What did it feel like to come back to Wilshire and feel a part again after having been gone for so long and wondering if you would be welcome with your whole self?
Well, they'll say I'll get emotional, but I don't think you can put words on it because I visited Dallas, you know, numerous times, obviously, you know, several times a year when I lived away. And when Mom and Dad were still in Dallas, you know, we would go for Christmas Eve service at Wilshire or Easter or whatever occasion I was home for. And I, you know, I had resentment. Yeah. And I even sort of fought my parents about it. And I challenged them. How can you go to a church that would not accept me or not marry me? I kind of put them in a rough situation, which probably wasn't fair. But I was struggling so much about that. And then when I came back and then found out the road you led, the church down in 2016, Mom told me about it and I was so incredibly happy, but I still found myself just a little bit like, you know, okay, because there was more hurt there than I think I realized with the church, not God.
Okay, so let's pick that up after the break. I want to promote a local nonprofit that is dear to you. But I'd like us to be able to do some more of this conversation in that direction, because I think it's so helpful to people who are wrestling with just the same kinds of things. Yes. So thank you, Cheryl.
Good God salutes the vital services provided to our community by the North Texas Food Bank. Each day, the North Texas Food Bank Feeding Network provides access to more than 190,000 meals for hungry children, seniors, and families. Visit ntfb.org to get involved.
We're back with Cheryl Allison. And Cheryl, you were just talking about your experience of coming back to our church as an adult with your wife Natalie now, yes. And how at first it was, though it was exciting, it was also still difficult because you had to wrestle with some of the old disappointments and bitterness that had made it hard for you through the years. I'm sure that's true of so many LGBTQ folk who wrestle with their relationship to church. Keep talking us through that a little bit, because it's not just about the question of how gay Christians feel, but also those who wrestle with how can we be welcoming and how to help their churches become a more open place. So you were talking about getting past that bitterness. Yes.
So Natalie and I did visit Wilshire, and it was surreal for me. You know, so many memories in the hallways and in that sanctuary, and I pictured myself up there singing. And but I felt immediately a different energy in the church. The people that remembered me came up and gave me a hug, and I immediately said, "This is my wife, Natalie." Right. Because I have never not been out or denied who I am, and the hugging and the embracing and the non-issue of it was slightly overwhelming at the beginning, but it was healing. Good. And one person told me, "Welcome home. Yes. We are a better home now." Wow. And that's what they told me the day that Natalie and I joined the church, and I rejoined. And I think that's what's true. I think for me, and maybe many LGBTQ community that is looking for a church, we want to find a church that it doesn't say you are welcome here because we love we hate the sin but love the sinner. Right. Do you know that old saying? Sure. And listen, you are welcome here because God loves all. Right. And so all people in spite of your lifestyle are welcome here, because to me that's loving someone halfway. Yes. And I think that's something that the church and many churches can continue to challenge themselves, because I see a lot of times, whether it's on social media or elsewhere in articles, where there will be a church or church members that are supporting, they really truly are, in good intentions, the LGBTQ community, and they've had a journey to get there, right? But they sort of justify or show their support of the community by saying, listen, who are we to judge? Right. Aren't we all sinners? Aren't we all?
Which automatically makes you, as a gay person, sinful because you're gay. Exactly. Not because you've been in some way unjust or unfaithful or some such thing like anyone else. Sure. But just by the fact that you're constitutionally predisposed to love the same gender person. Yes. Because we tend to get, the community tends to get lumped into a list of, look, we love the liars and adulterers and that sort of thing. And I always say, yes, I have transgressions and sins like anyone else, but being an LGBTQ person is not one of them. Right. And I think, because I feel like when that happens, it's backhanded acceptance, like a backhanded compliment. Sure. And that,
I think sometimes keeps the community away from churches because they feel like I don't want to just be accepted because they're like, we've grown so much, we're going to welcome the sinner.
Right.
You know?
Right. Well, I think the thing that we're all learning is that there's hard work to do sometimes to read the Scripture honestly and faithfully, and to look in the eyes of your sister or brother who is your friend and neighbor and fellow Christian, and put those two things together in a way that honors God, that is not unfaithful, and that realizes that that it may be the things that we've assumed we knew all along have to take a fresh look at, not because we're suddenly modern people, but because this has always been true, not because we're suddenly trying to make something true.
Right.
That people are created the way they are, and then are responsible for who they are before God. So thank you for helping us grow in all of that, and for being patient with us and encouraging us along the way.
Thank you for what you did.
Sure.
Because I know it opened so many eyes and was a very difficult time for the church, and still can be, you know, but and a lot of backlash happened.
It did, and it does, and you know, I think no growth takes place without struggle, and for those who could not see things the way the majority at Wilshire saw them, they don't see that they have resisted growth. They think we have simply been unfaithful, you know, and I understand this is something God has to work out for all of us and be our judge, but to those of us who have been able to experience new life with people like you and Natalie, and to be church together, there's a joy and a freshness to our life now that we just we give thanks to God for.
Oh, so do I. And you know what I think is important? Gay Christians, you know, back in the 90s when I was first moving to New York, we didn't have a lot of options for churches that we grew up in. So we formed our own, you know, the community churches, or you know, we have the really big one here in
Cathedral
Dallas,
of Hope.
the Cathedral of Hope, which is an amazing church.
Wonderful people.
And there are members of the gay community that want to go to church with the majority of other members being gay.
Yes.
And that's incredible. And I'm so glad that they have a church like that. For me, because it's a personal choice, I always wanted a church that was diverse in all aspects, whether it was race or sexual orientation or whatnot, because I never felt different. That's the whole key. I never felt different, and so I wanted to go to a church that had so many different colors in it, you know, and now we have that because of Wilshire and churches like Rutgers Presbyterian.
Yes. Right. Yeah, I think it's a misconception that some people think that gay people want to be treated specially, when actually they want to be treated equally.
Exactly.
They want to be acknowledged as being who they are and different in that respect, but it seems to me that all my gay friends are asking me to do is to recognize that we're sisters and brothers in Christ, and we have unique gifts and ways of looking at the world. Let's enrich one another by our friendship and commonality in Christ, and serve the Lord together.
Yes, exactly.
So,
and you nailed it.
Yeah.
It's not special rights. It's equal rights.
Right.
You know, just wanting to be treated equal.
Well, that has actually driven you to a lot of the work that you do in advocacy too. And you know, we'll talk later about on the next episode some about your work as an actress and filmmaker and all of that. But I know that you are a passionate advocate. In fact, when the border crisis happened, you jumped down to the border and made sure that you were there to help with Sister Norma and meeting children that had been separated from their families. But it seems that your experience, if I'm reading you right and understand you well, your experience of feeling somewhat a marginalized person in society drives you not only to just support LGBTQ rights, but also those who are equally marginalized in society.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The immigration, for example, the separation of the families and children just really hit me.
Right.
And you know, the way I looked at it is it's not a political issue. This was a human issue that was going on here. And no matter what our differences may be as far as how we protect our borders, that's another conversation.
Yes.
And so I, you know, had the opportunity and some free time to be able to go down there because I start to feel so passionate about something, and if I can act, then it helps me. It helps also heal me through, you know, my frustrations of what was going on. And you know, and I have to tell you, I put out the call to the church and to friends and family, and we raised, you know, I think it was over $2,500, $3,500 like that, and went down there, and the Humanitarian Respite Center really needed it. So, and it is probably, like you said, from fighting for my own rights from a young woman on.
You know, there's a beautiful verse in 2 Corinthians, the first chapter, where Paul is talking about how we have been comforted by God in our distress, and then offer the same comfort to others who are going through times of distress themselves. And it is as if what he's saying is the compassion of God for us strikes us in certain ways that heal us, and then it makes us sensitive to people so that we can offer them the same kind of compassion. This seems to be the kind of beautiful cycle of compassion and love and mercy that God has given to us, and you're beautifully demonstrating that.
Oh, well, thank you. I think as I've gotten older, you know, I've realized how important that is. You know, as an actress, it's a selfish business, and you're on the road a lot, and you know, it's hard to have a lot of free time to do things like this. But at this point in my life, I've decided I really want to spend my time working on projects or you know, filming projects that raise awareness, that is more than just a film or a movie, that helps bring a social issue to light. You know.
Well, I think it's also maybe partly what happens to us at this stage of our lives too. Is you know, Richard Rohr, the Franciscan priest, talks about how there are sort of two halves of life, and the first half of life tends to be about your sort of building your own career and your own path, but then there's a kind of recognition that that's not everything, and then the question is, what will you do then? And often it comes from some life crisis, it comes from some epiphany, some awakening, and we really honor that gift of time best when I think we turn then to say, what has all this been about, and how can we use our lives to serve others? And then the meaning really starts flooding into us.
It really does. And I think it's not a coincidence that this part of my life and activism really started to blossom once I was back home.
Yes.
Isn't that interesting?
Beautiful. Yes.
You come home. I'm home physically here in Dallas. I see my family and relatives so much. I'm back home at Wilshire.
Yes.
And it's just, the pieces have all sort of fit. It's come full circle. It's really interesting.
Well, it's a great joy to us, Cheryl, to have you back and to get to know you and Natalie together as well, and to serve the Lord together. I look forward to another conversation where we'll talk more about your filmmaking and acting and all of that. Thank you for being with us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Good. Okay.
Good God salutes the vital services provided to our community by the North Texas Food Bank. Each day, the North Texas Food Bank Feeding Network provides access to more than 190,000 meals for hungry children, seniors, and families. Visit ntfb.org to get involved.